Warning, what you're about to hear is disturbing. A creature straight out of a nightmare is attacking our livestock, consuming living flesh and sending shockwaves through the beef industry. If you eat meat or care about the future of our food, you need to see this. Hey guys, it's Jera with Wicked Prepared. Doesn't it seem like every day it's something new? Now there's a new threat affecting one of the most important foods in our food supply, something that's already been under pressure, and something that most of us rely on. For preppers, food security is paramount, but what happens when a flesh-eating parasite threatens one of our most vital protein sources? The New World screwworm is back, and it's exposing a critical vulnerability in our food chain. Today, I'm going to talk about exactly what it is, why it matters so much for our food supply and our prepper pantries, what it could mean for beef prices, and most importantly, what we can do about it right now. So stay tuned to find out how to fortify your prepper pantry against this unexpected crisis. And whether you personally eat beef or not, it still matters because beef plays a much bigger role in the food system than most people realize. So real quick, let's just talk about what exactly this new threat is. And I do want to warn you that these are kind of disgusting. So for anyone who's really squeamish, I'm going to put a timestamp here on the screen for you somewhere so you can skip past this part if you want to. The New World screwworm is basically a flesh-eating parasitic fly larva. These flies are slightly larger than a typical housefly. They look pretty normal. They've got a metallic greenish bluish body, big orange eyes. And yes, there are actually an old world screwworm fly as well, which is mainly found in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. But here in the Western Hemisphere, we get the New World screwworm flies, which are actually the more deadly of the two, partly because they can lay more eggs at one time. The scientific name of the New World screwworm fly, which I can't pronounce, I'm not even going to try, but I will put it on the screen for you because part of the name actually means man-eater. These flies lay their eggs in open wounds, even minor ones, or other mucous membranes or other fleshy openings of warm-blooded animals and mammals. Yes, mammals. So they can infect birds and poultry, livestock, wildlife, pets, and even humans. Although human cases are rare, there was actually a human case in the US just last year, but this was someone who had traveled outside the US and they were cured. Generally, though, the biggest risk is to livestock. When the eggs hatch into larvae, which happens pretty quickly within a number of hours, they immediately use these sharp, powerful hooks that they have on their mouths to start burrowing into and eating the living flesh of the host animal. Unlike most other species of fly larvae that only eat dead and decaying flesh, these are highly destructive and they will continue burrowing deep inside of the animal, killing and consuming its flesh as they go. Their bodies are covered with spines that kind of anchor them into the tissue, making them difficult to remove and kind of inspiring their name, screwworm. If they're left untreated, this parasite will rapidly cause infection and serious illness, and it will continue to live inside the animal until the host animal is deceased. It can be treated though, and this involves obviously catching it early, manually removing larvae from the wounds, using topical or injectable insecticides to kill any that remain, and then cleaning and treating the wounds, and sometimes possibly the use of antibiotics to heal or prevent secondary infections. And what I found really interesting is how the government goes about getting rid of the screwworm fly population altogether. So we know that flies in general have a pretty short lifespan, and these New World screwworm flies will mate one time in their lifetime, just once. So what the government does is they have these facilities where they breed millions of male screwworm flies, and they expose them to low-level radiation, which leaves them sterile. And then they airdrop them en masse over areas that are affected by the New World screwworm fly. So they basically trick the females into mating with these sterile males, and that effectively reduces the population. And apparently it works pretty well because the New World screwworm fly has been eradicated from the US since the 1960s, but we do occasionally see a few outbreaks here and there when it does manage to sneak back in. And that's what we're seeing now. Since the beginning of this month, June 2026, there have now been multiple confirmed cases in Texas and New Mexico, leading to basically an agricultural state of emergency in those areas. Now the name of the game is to squash this down before it can become established again and before it can cause too much damage to the beef industry, which is already suffering. We've talked a lot before about what's already been happening with cattle and with our beef supply here in the United States. The US cattle herd is sitting at a 75-year low, and that's not a small thing. It means that we're working with fewer animals in the system before anything new even happens. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Ongoing drought has forced a lot of ranchers to reduce their herds. Feed costs have been high, land, equipment, fuel, things like that have all gotten more expensive. And on top of all that, the average age of a cattle rancher in the United States is over 58 years old. So this industry is not just dealing with low cattle numbers, it's also dealing with the question of who's going to keep doing this work in the next generation. And I think we should all pause on that for a second, because without farmers and ranchers, where would we be? It's easy to walk into a grocery store and see the meat there and the vegetables and the dairy products and all of that, and just kind of forget to think about how it all gets there in this day and age. So this screwworm situation is putting a lot of additional strain on an industry that's already pressed hard. And this is both time and money costs. Cattle ranchers, they may be dealing with thousands of acres of pasture and hundreds or even thousands of head of cattle. And these all need to be inspected every day for signs of screwworm, even if they never find anything. That's a lot of labor. And if it is detected, it means even more cost in time, labor, and medical supplies to treat it. And then even if it's successfully caught and treated, and it doesn't end up killing the animal, it still leads to significant weight loss in the affected animals. And that's going to lower the market value, and it's going to lower the total amount of meat that ever reaches the market. Because the meat that makes it into the grocery store is safe, at least from this. I mean, who knows what else could be in it? But screwworms don't infect packaged meat in the grocery store. They want the living animal. So the threat to our food supply comes largely from the damage that it could do to the live animals, to the herds, especially when we're already dealing with a reduced cattle herd, and from the added costs that ranchers face to inspect, treat, monitor, and protect their animals. These costs don't just disappear. Anything that affects the cost of raising cattle is going to show up in the price of the meat that we buy. But there's another and possibly even more significant way that it affects our food supply and the prices of our food, and that's trade. Part of the way that the U.S. combats screwworm is closing the borders to cattle coming through from affected and at-risk countries. And the U.S. does rely somewhat on cattle coming from places like Mexico. A lot of these animals are feeder cattle. They get brought into the U.S. and then they're raised and finished here before they eventually become part of our beef supply. So when the border closes to those animals, that doesn't mean that every grocery store is going to run out of beef instantly, but it does mean that fewer animals are moving into a system that's already tight. And when the supply is already tight, even a small disruption can matter. It can mean fewer cattle available for feedlots. It can mean more competition for the cattle that's already there. It can mean higher prices for the ranchers, the feedlots, the processors, and so eventually the consumers. And now we're seeing restrictions going in the other direction too. Mexico has also been moving to block most live animal imports from the United States after the screwworm cases that were confirmed here. So it becomes a two-way trade issue. We're trying to protect our herds from animals coming in. Mexico is trying to protect its herds from animals coming from our side. And in the middle of all that, you've got the ranchers, the feedlots, the processors, and the consumers dealing with the fallout. And that's why this is bigger than just a few sick animals. When something like this shows up, it means things like quarantine zones and border closures, things that limit animal movement, that increase inspections, and that slow or even stop trade altogether. And all of that adds friction to the food system. Remember that friction doesn't mean that you're not going to find any beef at the grocery store. It doesn't mean the shelves are empty, but it does mean there's less to go around, and prices are going to go up even further than they already have as a result. It's just simple supply and demand. There is beef to be had, less of it, but people can't afford it. Why does this matter so much to us, or at least most of us? Well, we eat a lot of beef in the US. For a lot of American families, beef is the foundation of some of the most common meals that we make. It's a major contributor to our diet, and it may not always be a slab of steak, but it's there in some way, shape, or form. On average, Americans eat around 60 pounds of beef per person per year. Remember, that's an average. So that works out to a little over a pound a week for the average person. And beef isn't just calories. It's actually one of the main ways that most Americans get certain nutrients like B12, zinc, iron in the form that our bodies can most easily absorb, and complete protein. So it's important to our diet. When the price of a dietary staple goes up, it gets harder to keep nutritious meals on the table, but it also gets harder to build an emergency stockpile, because our prepper pantry should be a reflection of what we eat every day. And shelf-stable foods are usually going to be a little more expensive than the fresh version of that same food because whether it's canned or freeze-dried, the process and the packaging all cost money. And whether you're doing it yourself or you're buying it that way, you're paying for it one way or another. So when the price of the raw product goes up, that can mean trouble for our prepper pantries too. And the answer isn't always as simple as just switching to another meat, another source of protein. Because if you're thinking about that, then everyone else is probably thinking the same thing. And then we're right back in the same supply and demand situation. When the demand starts going up because no one can afford beef, so they buy more pork or more chicken or whatever it is, those prices are going to start to rise too. And those are going to become harder to find as well because there's more demand. We're going to see more gaps on the shelf there as well. So what can we do? We need to come at it from several different angles. One, get ahead of shortages and price increases wherever and however we can. Know your prices in your area and basically know a good deal when you see one. If you see beef or any other meat for that matter, any other protein for a good price, buy it. Whether it's fresh, canned, or freeze-dried, if you have the equipment and the skills, you can can or freeze-dry it yourself if you find a deal on fresh meat. If you can't, freeze what you can't use right away to preserve that low price any way you can. And secondly, we need to build resilient pantries and nutritious pantries so that we're not over-dependent on the same small number of foods to meet our nutritional needs. We need to look at it from a nutritional standpoint as well. How can we build a food supply that's nutritionally dense and nutritionally complete and balanced? When it comes to beef, how can we replace those nutrients when we can't or don't have beef? Protein is a big one, the protein we get from beef. How are we going to replace that complete protein? Obviously, other meats, like I mentioned, things like chicken and pork, as long as they stay affordable, bulk up your shelf-stable protein variety with canned and freeze-dried meats of all different kinds. And don't forget about other protein boosters like powdered milk and eggs. Any protein that comes from an animal source is going to be a complete protein, and those are no exception. And besides the protein, milk and eggs are also going to supply the B12, just like beef would. Now, those are some pretty typical choices. Everyone, has meat and milk and eggs in their prepper pantry. Everybody wants more of that. But there's a few more items that people don't tend to think about as often that can give a huge nutritional boost to your preps and can help cover a lot of the bases that beef usually covers. And usually for not a whole lot of money. They're usually pretty inexpensive. One thing a lot of people don't think about is TVP. When it comes to meat, and especially like ground meats, TVP is a great thing to have to replace the meat or to stretch the meat that you have to go further. And it's one of the more rare plant-based complete proteins. A lot of plant-based proteins are not complete. It comes as little dry kind of crumbles that you soak in liquid, and it then will have the texture of basically just like ground meat, cooked ground meat. You can find it unflavored, or you can find it flavored like different meats, like chicken or beef flavored. And you can even soak it with broth instead of water so you can have more of a meaty flavor. Besides the protein, it also usually has some fiber, which is something that meat doesn't have. And it has a long shelf life when it's stored properly. Another one to think about is fish, seafood, and shellfish, your canned fish and seafood. A few items you can even find freeze-dried, since I know everybody always wants freeze-dried, but it's time to move beyond the tuna. Don't think of just tuna. Pretty much everyone gets tuna, and tuna does have the complete protein. It has some other nutrients, but there are some other options that aren't as common that can provide even more nutrients. Oysters for the zinc and clams for the B12 and iron, for instance. Seafood and shellfish tend to get overlooked, but some of these are really significant nutritionally, especially when you're comparing them to beef. Another thing that I highly recommend is getting some nutritional yeast, fortified nutritional yeast. This is pretty inexpensive, and it's got a cheesy flavor. You can stir it in or sprinkle it on to just about anything. And it's surprisingly a really fantastic source of complete protein and B vitamins. So definitely get some of that into your prepper pantry if you don't already have it. One more thing that you may not have thought of is blackstrap molasses. While this isn't really a protein source, it is an excellent source of iron and other minerals. And just like honey, it's a forever food. If you stock a jug in your pantry, you're not going to have to worry about it going bad. Think outside the box when it comes to your prepper pantry. Foods that pack a lot of nutrition are worth every inch of shelf space that they take up. Now, I've just given you a few ideas of some more unusual prepper pantry superfoods, but let's wrap up this list with a few of the more traditional non-animal sources of protein. And these tend to be very budget friendly. So even though they may mostly not be complete protein sources, they're still important to stock up on in abundance. Things like peanut butter, beans, and lentils can also help fill the void when beef is hard to find or hard to afford, or when your prepper pantry stash of shelf-stable beef runs out. The goal here isn't to find one perfect beef replacement. It's just to build a pantry that can cover those vital nutrients from several different angles. A pantry that doesn't rely on a small number of foods that are volatile and expensive. A pantry that's flexible and can do more than just keep us alive for a few days. One that can actually sustain us and keep our bodies in good working order, no matter what and no matter how long. It's not optional anymore. It's not just for the tinfoil hat crowd. Our food system is fragile. We've seen that over and over again. We need to have our own food supply, a solid food supply that can kind of carry us at least a few months, longer is better, to kind of ride out these inevitable bumps in the road. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a worm emoji down in the comments. And check out this video next for some more info that you need right now. I'm Jera with Get Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.